No one fighter is perfect, and in a sport as unpredictable as mixed martial arts, sometimes a great champion's undoing can come at the most unexpected of times, against the most unlikely of opponents. But for these 10 fighters, over the years there has been more than enough tape out on them to single out one major weakness to their otherwise fantastic skill sets. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at 10 MMA legends and their very obvious Achilles heels. Alistair Overeem, his chin. Alistair Overeem got just about as close as a fighter can get to becoming UFC champion. After failing to build on his early momentum in the UFC by losing to Antonio Bigfoot Silva, Overeem would hang around the upper echelons of the heavyweight division, beating some of the world's best, but always finding himself on the receiving end of a knockout loss that totally killed his momentum. His defeat to Stipe Miocic at UFC 203 showcased a version of the Reem who seemed to have the perfect game plan in effect, fighting to his strengths and avoiding his weakness through his constant running and pot-shotting, something that nearly saw him emerge with that coveted gold belt. But once again, his chin let him down in a big way. Across 67 fights in mixed martial arts, Overeem has lost 15 by way of KO or TKO, and when you factor in his 3 knockout losses across 15 kickboxing fights, that is one hell of a lot of damage. Overeem's chin has been cracked more times than any other top-level fighter who managed to stay relevant at the top, making his longevity in the sport as a heavyweight, of all divisions, totally crazy and, if we're honest, a bit worrying. Daniel Cormier, body shots. Daniel Cormier beat every fighter he ever fought not named Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic, and he did of course knock out Stipe in one of their 3 tightly contested fights, but both of those opponents, as well as his UFC 200 adversary Anderson Silva, were able to really make a dent on Cormier's defense with their use of body shots. Jon Jones used them consistently in their UFC 214 rematch to slow DC down before uncorking the fight-ending head kick in the 3rd round. Even the aging Anderson Silva nearly finished the reigning 205-pound champion in the final seconds of their short-notice non-title snooze fest. And of course, in one of the all-time great mid-fight switch-ups, Stipe Miocic overturned what was a losing effort to hammer away at Cormier's midsection late in their fight, eventually opening up the finish and his chance to regain the title. DC had a near-perfect record inside the cage, but there was a common trend among his dicier moments in there, that's for sure. Ronda Rousey, striking. Here comes one of the most obvious picks of the lot. There was a period in MMA history, not a very long period mind you, but a period of time nonetheless, that saw the fairly grounded and well-deserved levels of hype that surrounded Ronda Rousey move into a different stratosphere entirely. All of a sudden, this undeniably excellent judoka and submission threat seemingly also came equipped with world-class striking, and a sub-minute KO of Bethe Correia only served to make her diehard fans double down on their opinion of Ronda's total lack of weaknesses. Well, as it turned out, not only was Rousey's striking offense, and in particular her defense, not a strength, but unfortunately her stand-up game was also a glaring weakness, a facet to her overall skill set that was there to be exploited by the next contender in line, the former boxing world champion Holly Holm, and we all know how that one played out. Ronda's terrible footwork, her non-existent head movement, and extremely rough technique left her completely and utterly outgunned by the preacher's daughter, and the return matchup against Amanda Nunes that followed, yeah, that was even worse. Justin Gaethje, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When you can stand and trade like Justin Gaethje, who the hell actually needs to have a grappling game? Well, as it turned out, the highlight's very limited level of defense against high-level black belt BJJ worked against him pretty decisively in there with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and as well to some extent Charles Oliveira. Justin, in case we forget, was actually having success against Khabib with his leg kicks, and if he did have some degree of defensive prowess when on the mat with someone as high level as Nurmagomedov, who knows what opportunities could have sprung up. But no, Gaethje's game is pretty much entirely based around anti-wrestling, and once he can stop you from taking him down, he's pretty happy to just continue trying to knock your head off. But this glaring weakness is there to be exploited, and his future opponents will be more than aware of that fact, unless they do want to go full Michael Chandler and dive headfirst into the Justin Gaethje game. BJ Penn. Motivation. BJ Penn is a bona fide legend of the fight game, and on his best day, there were few more naturally talented athletes to ever do it. After earning his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in just 3 years, Penn excelled in MMA just as much as his base sport, eventually winning championship belts in 2 different weight classes, before falling into one of the craziest and most unfortunate declines the sport has ever known. Penn just couldn't commit consistently to the type of training needed to draw out his success. There was indeed a major separation between the lifestyle that BJ wanted to lead and his ability to give fighting his all, and this affected his cardio, his confidence, and ultimately, the results he was able to carve out. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads. Charles Oliveira, striking defense. Look, there are no bigger fans of Charles Oliveira than myself and the others here at MMA Dive, but as much as one of Do Bronx's biggest strengths lies in his ability to rebound from the most overwhelming of setbacks, it does need to be said that Oliveira's striking defense, and in particular, his head movement, leaves a lot to be desired. In some ways, the Charles Oliveira story wouldn't be as compelling if he didn't manage to consistently overturn deficits mid-fight, but if we are being impartial about this, it would be wrong of me to omit this glaring weakness in his game. I mean, look, Islam Makhachev deserves all of the credit in the world for knocking Charles down the way that he did, but let's be real, you couldn't ask for a more hittable opponent to score a rare knockdown against. Conor McGregor, cardio. A lot of Conor McGregor's issues inside the cage do boil down to his cardio. Indeed, you could argue that his incredibly large ego, or shortcomings when it comes to being the nail instead of the hammer, are to blame for most of his losses. But I would actually point to his fast twitch muscle fibers, which offer one of his biggest strengths in his electric striking, as the thing that contributes to his drop in power as the fight goes on. I just don't think McGregor is ever going to be a marathon kind of fighter. And sure, while his explosive striking does offer benefits, I do think that it is in many ways a drawback. I also don't for a second believe that Conor's grappling is half as bad as people make it out to be. But even with that being said, once his cardio does start to drop off, and it tends to drop off fast, he does sometimes find himself a little helpless against fresher fighters, a common trend in his career to date. The dude needs regular fights more than anything right now, so only time will tell how willing he is. Donald Cerrone, liver shots. Donald Cowboy Cerrone is a man who lives up to his moniker in more ways than one, and though it wouldn't be right of us to speculate on his love of a nice cold beer and the correlation it may or may not have with his inability to handle liver shots, it did become common knowledge midway into his career that body shots were a major kryptonite to his game. And sure, tagging Cerrone in the midsection isn't going to guarantee you a victory, but in those massive moments and matchups that he so often failed to deliver in, you'll find that his opponent's ability to nail him to the torso was often a key weapon. The weakness comes down to a combination of actual physical susceptibility and maybe a lack of defensive skills. Jon Jones, himself. Next we come to perhaps the most notorious, consistent, and totally unsolvable fighter weakness of the lot. Okay, maybe it is unfair to say that Jon Jones is certain to totally screw up things again, because in reality, to rule out anyone's shot at redemption and course correction would be wrong. But at the same time, it's pretty clear that this guy's progress so far isn't enough to fill most of us with confidence. Some give this guy quite a lot of leeway because of his talents, because of the fact that he is a wild man, and that may well be the thing that makes him special. But at this stage, especially considering how infrequently he has competed in recent years, there is no positive spin to put on his most glaring weakness. A fighter as special as Jon Jones deserves to be competing as often as he can, and though he is already considered to be one of the all-time greats, it's pretty clear that he never quite reached his potential. Nick and Nate Diaz, the MMA rule set. And finally we come to everyone's favorite pair of totally lovable but unapproachable fighting siblings. To be honest, this one is more for a bit of fun than anything else, and if I were to seriously isolate their biggest weakness, I'd of course have to point to leg kicks, game planning, motivation to actually fight, contract negotiations, interviews, keeping a cool head in tense situations, and so on. But in all honesty, I think that the MMA rule set and how these bouts are scored has always been something of a thorn in the side to these two guys, especially Nick. Not only because of their total lack of respect for them, but also because of the fact that they'll be content in taking the moral victory, so long as they don't get finished. Don't get me wrong, I love these guys, and Nick Diaz in particular is one of my all-time favorites, but their unshakable commitment to their beliefs about the fight game have maybe prevented these two from engaging with the sport on a different level, utilizing the skills they do have to a use that goes beyond the whole Diaz shtick. But even as I say all of this, it just doesn't sound quite as fun, so don't mind me, what do I know? Anyway, that will just about do it for this video, but what do you think is the most glaring fighter Achilles heel in the sport? If you do want to help in supporting the channel, liking the video and subscribing would do wonders. Thank you for watching.